You looking for some wide receiver help to set your lineup here in Week 16? Let's break down all the matchups and talk some wide receivers. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully you're all doing well. Let's talk some wide receivers for this week. It's a very important week, right? We want to make sure we have the right guys in our lineup. Hopefully guys that don't get hurt in the first quarter. But what do we need to do here Week 16 to set that right lineup? We're going to talk about it here real quick before I get into all these matchups, breaking down all these wide receivers. Don't forget, just because your seasons are coming to an end, the channel is not going away. We'll be here year-round football. Got some baseball coming next year. Got some of the top experts in the industry coming in to help you guys out here in the future. Definitely a lot to look forward to in 2019. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, turn the notification bell on because you're not going to want to miss some of the things we have coming up. But now, let's talk some wide receivers for Week 16. All right, there are no Thursday night games this week. Once again, everybody pay attention. No Thursday night games this week. They don't start till Saturday, so you have a couple extra days here to set your lineups if you're trying to make that decision. The first matchup on Saturday, Redskins at Titans. But it's Week 16. Do we really want to trust any of the Redskins wide receivers in our lineups this week? Probably not. Not unless you're in one of these larger than 12-team leagues, 14, 16, multi-flex leagues, whatever it is. Jamison Crowder may be the only option. He missed the majority of the season with injury. Now he has Josh Johnson at quarterback in a run-first offense with Adrian Peterson, who's going to see close to 20 touches a game. Not the most prolific offense in all of the land. However, if you're struggling for a flex play, Jamison Crowder has put up at least 7 fantasy points over the last 3 games since returning, and it's the 21st ranked defense against opposing wide receivers in the Tennessee Titans. Over their last 2 weeks, they've given up 329 yards to opposing wide receivers. Not a bad matchup. A lot easier to throw on Tennessee than it is to run on Tennessee. Jamison Crowder may be the only guy I take a risk on, but that's only in larger leagues as a flex play. On the Titans side, you really only have Corey Davis that's fantasy relevant here for most weeks. Not so much the past couple weeks, though. Last week, against the New York Giants, 3 catches for 33 yards. In fact, he only has 54 yards receiving over his last 2 games. But the potential and the upside is there, and I love this matchup this week against the Washington Redskins, who are giving up, on average, 37 points per game to opposing wide receivers. Over their last 5 games, they've given up a total of 8 receiving touchdowns to opposing wide receivers. Definitely a matchup in which I would not have an issue starting Corey Davis as a flex play this week. He has high upside, has touchdown upside. He's the number 1 target in that offense. Even though I do expect a heavy dose of Derrick Henry again, that could open up the passing game for Corey Davis. I think he's a sneaky good play here for Week 16. Ravens and Chargers are next, and the Ravens kind of similar to the whole Redskins deal. I'm kind of worried about starting anybody that is attached to the Baltimore Ravens at the wide receiver position. Really, the most consistent guy over the past few weeks has been Willie Snead, averaging right around 10.5 points a game his last 2 games. He had a little bit of a stretch there, weeks 12 and 13, where he didn't do a whole lot of anything. Other than that, though, he's been very consistent and very solid on the year. Lamar Jackson is going to have to throw in order to win this game against the Chargers. Does it go to Willie Snead, though? It's debatable. He's really a risk at this point. The Chargers have given up 31 points a game to opposing wide receivers. They've given up 4 receiving touchdowns over their last 4 games. Not the toughest of defenses, but not a pushover either. Being that they're a decent defense, I'm not willing to risk it with any of the Baltimore wide receivers this week. I'm not chancing it on Crabtree, Snead, or John Brown. All right, really on pins and needles for the Chargers, right? Because we don't know about Keenan Allen. And we may not know for a while. They may not announce it until right before the game. The good thing about that is he plays on Saturday. So if he doesn't go on Saturday, you'll still have options on your bench, more than likely, that play on Sunday. So you won't have to worry about him being locked in your lineup and not being able to change him out. That's a positive. However, if he plays, do we really trust him? And right now, I really don't. More than likely, he'll miss the week of practice. A hip injury for a wide receiver is something that is going to be painful to play through. Now, does that limit him to the point where he's just more of a decoy? Possibly. If that's the case and he does play as a decoy, it really boosts the value, in my opinion, of Tyrell and Mike Williams. The defense will still be paying attention to Keenan Allen, and the other two will be able to benefit from that. Now, if Keenan Allen sits, I still like Mike Williams and Tyrell Williams. However, I think the upside kind of gets limited a little bit on Mike Williams. I think the defense would focus their attention more on him going forward to make sure that he doesn't have another one of those ridiculous games that he had last week. Still has value, but as of right now, as of today, I feel more comfortable starting Mike Williams than I do Keenan Allen. On to Sunday we go. We got the Bengals and the Browns. For the Bengals, there's a chance that Tyler Boyd doesn't play. Not only not play in this game, there's a chance they shut him down for the last few games of the season. And if that happens, do we really want to trust John Ross, Cody Core, Alex Erickson, some of these guys in our fantasy lineups in the fantasy playoffs with Jeff Driscoll as their quarterback? Probably not. I see a lot more Joe Mixon, maybe more Gio Bernard in this game. Alex Erickson may get more opportunities out of the slot, but it's too much of a risk, in my opinion, to roster any of these guys, much less start them here in a critical week in your fantasy playoffs. On the Browns side, I really do like the Browns receivers this week, and I know that's kind of a stretch for a lot of you like Jarvis Landry owners who've been pretty disappointed at times with his production. But I said it in all my other videos, and I'm saying it again here. You're going to be playing at home against Cincinnati with Hugh Jackson on the opposite sideline. They're going to be a little bit extra motivated. Plus, the Browns are actually kind of playing with a chip on their shoulder right now, trying to prove a point that they belong, that they are a force to be reckoned with, which is really weird to say the words Browns and force in the same sentence. I don't know if I've ever done that. But you guys know what I mean. They are playing a lot better football, and I kind of expect them to kind of just give it a little bit extra this week just to try to, prove a point with Hugh Jackson on that other sideline. Jarvis Landry, Antonio Callaway are both guys in which I would put in my flex spot this week. Jarvis Landry could be fringe wide receiver 2. Last week against Denver, only 3 catches for 37 yards. But it's a decent matchup going up against the Cincinnati Bengals, giving up over 35 points a game to opposing wide receivers. They've given up 3 touchdowns in their last 4 games to opposing wide receivers. So they've been playing a little bit better on the defensive side, but it's still a great matchup in somewhat of a revenge-style game, if you could say, at home in Cleveland. I like both Landry and Callaway. Bucks and Cowboys next. For the Bucks, Mike Evans is really the only guy which I will continue to start on a weekly basis. A lot of people worried last week about his matchup with the Baltimore Ravens. Only had 4 catches. Turned him into 121 yards. He's wide receiver 9 on the season in PPR leagues. And yes, I get it. It's a difficult matchup this week. Right now, the Dallas Cowboys giving up only 27 points a game. That's good enough for second overall to opposing wide receivers. Didn't give up a touchdown last week. Kind of held Andrew Luck in check for the most part. It's a solid defense in Dallas on the secondary side of it. Mike Evans, though, at this point is almost matchup proof. With Jameis Winston in the game, he's really looking Mike Evans first on every single play, no matter what. Outside of that, though, Adam Humphries, maybe in deeper leagues, larger than 12 teams, as a flex play, preferably PPR leagues, still has some value, averaging right around 15 points a game. However, that's really skewed by his Week 13 matchup against Carolina, where he had 7 catches, 61 yards, and a touchdown. Still has upside, though. Only 4 catches in his last 2 games each. It's still a solid flex play in the larger leagues. Just not somebody that I'm looking to throw in there for a surefire bet this week against a difficult Dallas defense. That's only Mike Evans at this point. Well, the time has come. I'm sure you've been sitting here for a couple minutes and you've seen the ticker scrolling across the bottom, and you've been waiting for me to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. Why? Because for the first time ever in the history of this show, which is a brief history, it's 2 years, I'm going to name Amari Cooper, hashtag Amari Pooper, which will never go away, a start of the week. I get a lot of people saying, "Oh, quit disrespecting the guy and calling him that." It's a nickname. Chill out, people. I'm putting him as a start of the week. I'm acknowledging the fact that my biggest gripe with him over the past 2 years had been inconsistencies. Ever since he's gotten to Dallas, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 games, he's been consistent. Therefore, he's earned the spot to be one of the starts of the week, going up against a great matchup in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who give up on average over 37 points a game to opposing wide receivers. They've allowed a receiving touchdown in all but 1 game this season to an opposing wide receiver. We know now Amari Cooper is going to get the targets. He's going to get the looks. He's the top offensive option as far as the receivers go in this offense. He seems to have great chemistry with Dak. It's that time for me to acknowledge that Amari Cooper is now somebody who I can trust. You guys may have trusted him back in the day. Great for you. I didn't. Now I can say he's somebody that I would gladly throw into my lineup, one of the starts of the week this week, in a great matchup, in a game that Dallas has to win. I like Amari Cooper. There, I said it. Everybody can get off my back now. Vikings and Lions are next, and all the Adam Thielen owners are probably just as pissed as the Keenan Allen owners at this point. Why? Because Adam Thielen was actually healthy and still only had 2 catches for 19 yards this past week, and that hurt a lot of people. A lot of people in the fantasy playoffs were counting on Adam Thielen against the Miami Dolphins last week, and it didn't work out. Now, it's a little bit more difficult matchup this week. The Lions are actually 12th against opposing wide receivers, but they're still giving up over 30 points a game. Last week against Buffalo, gave up 172 yards and a touchdown to their wide receivers. It's Diggs and Thielen. It's an offense that looked a little bit more explosive last week, even though Thielen wasn't involved. Hopefully this offensive coordinator can really continue to expand the play calling and get the ball down the field a little bit more. I'm not giving up on Adam Thielen. If you have him, he's going right back into the lineup. Same with Stephon Diggs. All right, for the Lions, we got Kenny Galladay, and I'll be the first to admit that I did not like Kenny Galladay's chances last week. I think I actually had him as a sit last week. Why? He was going up against one of the top secondaries in Buffalo. He had an injured quarterback. Matthew Stafford was limited in practice all week long. There was even talks of him possibly not playing in the game. And in the 2 previous games to that, he'd had a combined 4 catches for 55 yards. The offense just didn't look like it was going anywhere near Kenny Galladay. Then they came out, he had 7 receptions for 146 yards. A great day for Kenny Galladay. Wasn't expecting it for sure. Now, he gets the Minnesota Vikings defense. Another tough defense. A game in which that he could severely be limited once again. He's just been a little bit inconsistent. Right now, the Vikings giving up on average right around 27 points a game. However, have not allowed a receiving touchdown to an opposing wide receiver in the last 2 games. They've only allowed 3 since week 4. Definitely a solid defense in Minnesota, who will be playing on the road in Detroit, which helps the Lions a little bit. But Kenny Galladay is still a risk. At this point, he's a flex play only with huge upside, but he's also got a very low floor. Bills and Patriots, and a lot of people are already hitting me up in the comment section talking about how, the Patriots aren't going to lose 3 in a row. They're going to be in Foxborough. They're going to absolutely kill the Bills. And I get that, but we all thought that when the Bills played the Vikings a few weeks back, and how did that turn out? You just never know. Now, am I coming out here right now and saying that the Bills are going to beat the Patriots? No, I don't think that they will, but I'm going to give them a little bit more credit than a lot of people are. Robert Foster been playing great football as of late, 3 100-yard games out of his last 5. Last week against Detroit, 4 catches, 108 yards, and a touchdown. The week before that, 7 for 104. He's been playing great. Yes, I do believe that the Patriots really try to limit and get after Josh Allen. And if that's the case, that really limits the upside of these wide receivers. Zay Jones has already proven inconsistent. Isaiah McKenzie is an interesting name to me. He's somebody who will be involved in both the run game and the passing game. If you're in a large, deep league, a PPR league, anything larger than 12 teams, Isaiah McKenzie could be a sneaky flex for you this week. Robert Foster, a wide receiver who I've really watched some film on and really think that the guy's got a ton of talent. I think his upside is going to be slightly limited this week, more down to like a wide receiver 3 at best, but the upside is there, the speed is there. He's definitely exciting to watch. It really all depends if Josh Allen can make some plays on the run, because he's going to be running, because they're going to be dialing up some pressure to get in his face early and often in New England. All right, for the Patriots, we'll talk about Julian Edelman and Josh Gordon. Now, Julian Edelman, in my opinion, He's a must-start every single week. The guy's had double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. Every single week he's been back with the exception of week 13 against a tough Minnesota defense. And in that game, he still had 9 fantasy points. It's a very safe play. In my opinion, Julian Edelman is somebody you can put into your wide receiver 2 spot, lock him in there every single week. He's going to help you. He's going to be productive. He's going to produce. Now, Josh Gordon this week is somebody I'm a little bit more worried about. They're going up against that difficult Buffalo secondary. And Tre'Davious White will more than likely spend most of his time on Josh Gordon. Last time these two teams met, they held Josh Gordon to 4 catches for 42 yards. I see something a little bit similar there, and for that reason, there's a more risk put on Josh Gordon. He has a high reward, but he's also a high risk. If you want to take that risk this week, Josh Gordon has upside, but it's going to be touchdown dependent, and if he doesn't get it, you're going to be highly disappointed. Take that into account when you're thinking about putting him into your lineup. There's a lot of risk here. His floor is pretty low this week. Would you rather take the chance on him getting 4 fantasy points with the opportunity that he could go out there and get you 20? That's a pretty big swing, and that's depending on you if you want to take it or not. Personally, I wouldn't risk it with Josh Gordon this week. He's actually going to be one of my sits of the week. Packers and Jets are next, and even though these teams really aren't playing for anything, the only guy that I would really start on the Packers side of the football, Davante Adams. Right now, the number one fantasy wide receiver. That's right, you heard me right. The number one fantasy wide receiver in PPR leagues. Definitely somebody who's matchup proof at this point, but it's a great matchup. The Jets give up on average over 40 points a game to opposing wide receivers. Great play. Good time to have Davante Adams. I'm really not willing to risk it with Randall Cobb, Equanimeous St. Brown, or MVS at this point in the fantasy playoffs. All right, for the Jets, I've been getting a lot of questions about Robbie Anderson and whether or not we can trust him here in Week 16, just due to his play the past couple weeks, which has been way improved. 11 catches, just under 175 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns in his last 2 weeks combined. But don't forget, this is the same Robbie Anderson that before these 2 games had only gone over 48 yards receiving one time on the year. I'm not quick to crown him as somebody who's a safe play all of a sudden for Week 16. In a deeper league, as a wide receiver 3, as a DFS play, maybe. That's probably where I would limit him. He's not a must start for me by any means, even though the Green Bay Packers on paper give up a lot of fantasy points to wide receivers. Over 37 at this point. Last week against Chicago, held them to 105 yards, no touchdowns. It's not a horrible defense in Green Bay. They've been torched on a few occasions by some great offenses. I just don't know if I throw the Jets into one of those great offenses. I have tempered expectations about Robbie Anderson this week. Texans and Eagles are next. For the Texans, you got DeAndre Hopkins, who's an automatic must-start every single week. Had himself an absolutely huge week last week where he had 10 catches for 170 and 2 touchdowns. A lot of people still concerned that he shows up questionable all week long, and he has for the most part the entire season. Don't worry, doesn't sound like there's any reason for him to miss this game. And Demaryius Thomas has also been somebody who's kind of creeping into that possible flex play here, towards the end of the season. Over his last 4 games, he's averaging right around 10 fantasy points a game. Not an overly high ceiling, but if the defense focuses on Demaryius Thomas, on DeAndre Hopkins, it's leaving more opportunities for Demaryius Thomas. And they have a great matchup this week. The Eagles, they give up the most fantasy points of any team to opposing wide receivers. Right now, almost 42 points a game. Definitely a great matchup for these guys. DeAndre Hopkins, like I said, must start. If you're struggling and looking for a flex, Demaryius Thomas has some upside this week also. For the Eagles, maybe like a lot of you guys out there, I really didn't see Alshon Jeffrey going out there and getting 8 catches for 160 last week. I don't think a whole lot of people were expecting that. By far his best game of the season. But now it's a difficult matchup against the Houston Texans team, giving up 33 points a game total to opposing wide receiver. That's good enough for 10th overall. However, over their past 2 games, they haven't looked that great through the air. Andrew Luck put up over 300 yards to his wide receivers in Week 14. Last week, 128 yards to the Jets wide receivers. 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. Starting to look a little vulnerable in Houston. Do I all of a sudden say Alshon Jeffrey is a must start? No, he's not a must start. He is a decent start with a high ceiling. Hopefully as a flex play at best with wide receiver 2 upside. It's a decent matchup. But this defense has been elite in the past. They really shut down wide receivers from Week 7 through Week 11. They allowed no touchdowns to opposing wide receivers. So they're capable of shutting an offense down. Does that happen this week on the road in Philadelphia? Debatable. I still think that Alshon Jeffrey is a solid play here for Week 16. Golden Tate, somebody else, one of these guys who may be a safe play. But he kind of showed that low floor 2 weeks ago against Dallas when he only had 1 catch for 7 yards. Right now, at this point of the fantasy championship or the fantasy playoffs, depending if you play next week or not, I would take a gamble on Alshon Jeffrey before I would Golden Tate. Falcons and Panthers are next. For the Falcons, Julio Jones, which if he's healthy with this hip injury, is an automatic start every single week. Pay attention, though. Let's see how this hip injury limits him throughout the week. There's a chance that they kind of scale him back, but it's something we need to pay attention to. As of right now, he still sounds like he's going to play and he'd be a must start. Mohamed Sanu and Calvin Ridley, they would all get a huge bump in production if Julio is limited. However, I still like these guys this week as a flex play, a solid floor flex play. 2 guys are going to get you right between 8 to 12 fantasy points and kind of give you a little bit of safety in your lineup. They'll be involved. Carolina is definitely easier to throw on than it is to run on. The breaking news that just happened during this recording, the Carolina Panthers are going to shut down Cam Newton. Now, what does that do to the Carolina offense? Probably doesn't. It probably improves it, to be completely honest, because Cam hasn't looked healthy. The Panthers need to score points in order for the ceilings of the Atlanta Falcons wide receivers to go up. So they have to throw more throughout the game. Definitely something to pay attention to throughout the week, because right now Mohamed Sanu and Calvin Ridley, they're decent flex plays here for Week 16. All right, for the Panthers, I just mentioned it, just got the news during this recording that the Panthers are going to shut down Cam Newton for the rest of the season. I did not know that at the beginning of this recording, and that's why I have all of the Carolina wide receivers listed as sits of the week. I didn't like what I saw from Cam the past few weeks. He looked like he was in pain every time he threw the ball. Underthrowing receivers, did not look healthy. For that reason, I did not like the upside of the wide receivers for Carolina. Now that Cam is sitting, I think they each kind of get a little uptick in value, which may sound crazy, but at least maybe they'll have a quarterback now that can get them the football and allow them to make a play with it. Both DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel have a decent flex value this week. Now, am I a surefire, yep, you got to get him into your flex? No, I'm not. But if you have no other options, I really think Curtis Samuel, more than DJ Moore, gets a slight uptick in value. If they can get him these balls in space, listen, they're going to scale back the game plan slightly. They're going to try to dial back the deep down the field throws. They're going to live in the short to intermediate passing game. That's where these guys thrive, and especially in PPR leagues, they can provide some good value for you here this week. Both these guys that are playmakers, that if they can get the ball in space, can make a big play happen. So even though they're sitting down there as all sits of the week, I do think that DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel have decent flex play value, especially in leagues of 12 teams or larger. Giants and Colts next. Giants still sounds like they may be without Odell Beckham. Nothing for sure has been reported yet, but it's starting to lean that way that he may not play again this week. So what do we do with Sterling Shepard? I'm making him a sit of the week. There hasn't been Odell Beckham there for the last 2 weeks. And what has Sterling Shepard done? A combined 4 catches for 54 yards. Yes, he had a touchdown there in that first game. 2 catches for 17 yards and a touchdown. However, this is a very difficult matchup against a very, very underrated Colts defense. Right now ranked 5th against opposing wide receivers. They've only given up 1 receiving touchdown to an opposing wide receiver the last 3 weeks combined. Definitely a solid defense in Indianapolis, which is not getting a lot of credit right now. Sterling Shepard is nowhere on my radar. I don't want him in my lineup in a critical week like this. For the Colts, it's really just T.Y. Hilton. It's another difficult matchup, but he's had difficult matchups here the past few weeks, and he's still producing. He's had over 100 yards 3 out of his last 6 games, including 2 games in there with 77 yards and 85 yards. He's still producing at a very high level, despite the difficult matchups. Same thing this week. It's the 7th-ranked defense of the New York Football Giants, but they've only allowed 2 receiving touchdowns over the past 4 weeks, but they still are allowing over 28 points a game. I still like T.Y. Hilton. He's still going to show up on the injury report all week long, so make sure you're paying attention to that, but as long as he's good to go on Sunday, he'd be in my lineup. Jags and Dolphins next, and for the Jags, it's really just Dede Westbrook at this point. I talked about him last week as somebody who could have some sneaky flex potential. Went out there, had 13 PPR fantasy points, but was really saved by a punt return touchdown. Thankfully, that saved that day, because other than that, 3 catches for 21 yards. It's a decent matchup going up against the Dolphins, 14th against opposing wide receivers, giving up 35 points a game. They've given up multiple touchdown receptions to opposing wide receivers 3 straight games. Things bode well for Dede Westbrook to have a good game. But do we want to trust it in that offense? It worries me. Deeper leagues, flex play, PPR leagues, pretty much only at this point. I don't trust anybody else in this Jacksonville offense other than Dede Westbrook, and that is even dwindling by the moment. For the Dolphins, I'm not going to mess with any of these guys here in Week 16. Difficult matchup. The Jags, still the number 1 defense against opposing wide receivers, only allowed 2 receiving touchdowns in their last 6 games. Not going to chance it with anybody from Miami this week. Rams and Cardinals next, and for the Rams, it's the same as pretty much every week. Woods, Cooks, Reynolds, they're all going to be in my lineup. I really do like the matchup for Josh Reynolds this week also. Somebody who saw huge volume last week, 12 targets, didn't do a whole lot with him. Some of them were not catchable, but the fact that he's getting the looks, and he gets a ton of red zone looks, had 5 catches for 70 yards last week. Now, we already know that if you have Cooks and Woods, more than likely, they're staples of your lineup. You're going to have them in there regardless. Josh Reynolds is somebody who I really like this week, though. I have him as one of my starts of the week going up against the Arizona Cardinals. He will not draw the coverage of Patrick Peterson. Cardinals are giving up over 34 points a game to opposing wide receivers, and over their last 4 games have given up 6 receiving touchdowns. It's a great play, great matchup, a perfect opportunity for the Rams offense to get back on track. For the Cardinals, we're not talking about anybody other than Larry Fitzgerald, and still he's a solid flex play every single week, especially in PPR leagues. 7 catches, 82 yards last week against Atlanta, and now the Rams defense, which is 23rd against opposing wide receivers, giving out over 36 points a game. It's a great matchup for Larry Fitzgerald. Outside of that, I don't trust Josh Rosen or this offense to really get anybody else that overly involved. The only guy that I would play for the Arizona Cardinals at the wide receiver position is Larry Fitzgerald, who week in and week out is a solid flex play for you. Bears and Niners up next. For the Bears, you got Allen Robinson, Taylor Gabriel, and Anthony Miller. And this is definitely a better matchup for these wide receivers than they've seen over the past few weeks. At least the potential is there. Going up against a San Francisco 49ers team giving up over 36 points a game, and over their last 4 weeks have given up 8 receiving touchdowns. Definitely a great matchup for these wide receivers. Now, in my opinion, the safest play this week would be Allen Robinson. Both Taylor Gabriel and Anthony Miller, their consistencies and usage and target share has been way too consistent all over the map over the second half of the season. Allen Robinson has kind of been that one lone consistency, if that's what you want to call him. He's got a safe floor, at least. The safest floor out of the 3, and I would have no issues having Allen Robinson in my lineup this week against the San Francisco 49ers. For the 49ers, it's really just Dante Pettis. He's the only guy worth owning and starting, in my opinion, especially as a flex play this week. It's a great matchup for him. It's a lot easier to throw on Chicago than it is to run on Chicago, and Pettis has been playing great. Over his past 4 games, he has 4 touchdowns. Hasn't had less than 13 fantasy points in PPR leagues over those 4 games. He's the top option and the top target in this offense and should continue to see that in the coming weeks. This week, like I said, the Bears, easier to throw on than run on. They're giving up over 36 points a game to opposing wide receivers. It's an opportunity for Pettis to go out there and be productive once again. The issue is Nick Mullins isn't going to have time to throw the ball down the field. He's going to have to dink and dunk with the short to intermediate routes, and if that's the case, it can only boost the value of Dante Pettis, especially in PPR leagues. Steelers and Saints are next, and for the Steelers, you got Juju and AB, both of which are going to start, even though you may have been slightly disappointed with their performances last week. However, this could be a lot more difficult matchup than it shows on paper. Right now, the Saints show that they give up the 31st most points to opposing wide receivers. There's only 32 teams. They're giving up over 41 points a game to opposing wide receivers. The issue with that is it really hasn't been the second half of the season. The majority of that was to start the season. Over their last 5 games, they've only allowed 1 receiving touchdown. Now, the game's going to be played in New Orleans, which helps the Saints. If that defense shows up once again, you could see some smaller numbers for Antonio Brown and Juju. Is that enough to sit them? No, the ceilings are too high, and the touchdown upside is too high, in my opinion, to sit either one of these guys, regardless of the matchup. Now, Michael Thomas is pretty much the only option there for the Saints, and he's done a little bit better production-wise the past 2 weeks. He has a combined 18 catches for 147 yards over the last 2 weeks. Still hasn't had a touchdown in 4 straight weeks. But now, the Pittsburgh Steelers defense is a nice matchup for Michael Thomas. Look what happened with Keenan Allen there a couple weeks back, where he absolutely exploded, where the Steelers allowed 258 yards and 2 touchdowns to the wide receivers of the Chargers. Last week against New England, they allowed 197 and a touchdown. Definitely a defense you can throw on, and I expect to see a lot of Michael Thomas in this game. I've said it for a couple weeks now. They really need to get this offense rolling again in New Orleans if they want to have a shot going deep into the playoffs. I believe that starts this week, starting with Michael Thomas. I expect a lot of targets going his way. Chiefs and Seahawks up next, and the Chiefs, looks like Tyreek Hill is going to be back good to go, inching his way back towards being 100%. But is he the only option there? Chris Conley has been an option in the past, didn't really do a whole lot last week, 2 catches for 19 yards. We had ourselves a hashtag Fat Kelvin sighting. He had 1 catch for 17 yards last week. Demarcus Robinson, 2 catches, 7 yards, had a touchdown. Outside of Tyreek Hill, really, there's not many options in Kansas City. We used to like Sammy Watkins because he was kind of somebody who would fly under the radar in that offense a lot earlier in the season. Ever since he's gone, though, there hasn't really been a clear-cut number 2 in this offense. Very hit or miss. Tyreek Hill must start every single week that he plays, that he's healthy, and then nothing changes this week. It's somewhat of a more difficult matchup against the Seattle Seahawks. They still give up over 34 points a game to opposing wide receivers, but this offense in Kansas City can still put up points in bunches, still like Tyreek Hill. He can make you have a great fantasy day in just one play. For the Seahawks, I really like the upside of both Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett this week, going up against a Kansas City defense which has already proven it can't stop wide receivers through the air. They've given up 6 receiving touchdowns over their last 4 games, including last week against the Chargers, gave up 204 yards and 2 touchdowns to their wide receivers. Mike Williams went absolutely crazy against these guys, and I expect Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett to be heavily involved once again this week. The Chiefs will be able to score points. If they're scoring points, Russell Wilson is still throwing the football deep into this game, and that's what we want. Both Tyler Lockett, who has the huge touchdown upside, and Doug Baldwin, who's starting to turn back the clock a little bit and be somewhat more productive. 3 touchdowns in his last 3 games this past week, 4 catches for 77 yards, 2 touchdowns. Hopefully he can keep that momentum going here to end the season. And I like both their opportunities for huge value this week in Week 16. I have them both listed as starts of the week. Monday Night Football, we got the Broncos and the Raiders. For the Broncos, we have a trio of wide receivers, Deshaun Hamilton, Tim Patrick, Courtland Sutton. The problem is nobody's really distanced themselves as the clear-cut number 1 in this offense. We thought it would be Courtland Sutton. He's been inconsistent. And with all 3 of these guys kind of sharing the workload, it's kind of knocking down the fantasy production of all of them also. They all have upside. The problem is the ceilings are capped because they're all eating into each other's production. Right now, the safest option may be Deshaun Hamilton. He's had 7 catches each of his last 2 games. However, not more than 47 yards in either of those games. Does have 1 touchdown, averaging right around 15 fantasy points in PPR leagues over his last 2 weeks. Tim Patrick, kind of similar. He's getting a little bit more production. He's had a total of 12 receptions over his past 2 games, giving him right around 150 yards overall, but no touchdowns. Courtland Sutton, somebody who we thought had a huge touchdown upside, only has 1 touchdown since week 7. I mean, it's just kind of a whole lot of jumbled mess in here. Right now, if I had to start only one of them, it would be Deshaun Hamilton. However, the matchup against the Oakland Raiders isn't as great as it sounds. Even though the Raiders aren't that great, they're still only allowing 32 points a game to opposing wide receivers, which is good enough for 9th overall in fantasy football. Not a bad matchup, not a great matchup. The problem is we don't know who sees the weekly volume in Denver. They all have limited ceilings. If I had to trust just one, it's Deshaun Hamilton. For the Raiders, it's really only Jordy Nelson still, and he's got a string of 3 games of double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues, which is a plus, and he's really the only option in this offense. Not a horrible matchup going up against Denver. They give up on average 35 points per game. It's going to be played at home in Oakland, so that's a plus. Jordy Nelson has some flex value for this week, especially in leagues of 12 teams or larger. He's got that flex play value with some upside. I'm not willing to throw him in there any higher than that, just due to the fact that it's the Oakland Raiders, and that offense, you never know what's going to happen. All right, those are all the wide receivers here for Week 16. Hopefully that was able to help you set your lineups. Make sure you guys are getting ready for Saturday. Got a live show coming Saturday afternoon, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to help you guys last minute with all your start-sit questions. Make sure you get those ready. I'm looking forward to talking to you guys. And once again, just because the season's almost over, doesn't mean you're going anywhere. We got a year's worth of content coming for you starting in January. We're not stopping the channel. We're going year-round. A lot of channels are going to stop. We're not. A lot of big things planned for you. Looking forward to it. Hopefully you have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.